In the electronics aisle of a Norfolk, Virginia Walmart, a quiet Navy IT technician was about to face the one person she'd spent 18 years avoiding. What started as a simple errand for a wireless router took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a 4-star Admiral who snapped her a salute. Margaret Maggie Chen wasn't your typical civilian tech. For nearly 2 decades, she'd buried her past behind server diagnostics and printer repairs, known for an uncanny ability to solve the Navy's most complex network problems in minutes. When they encountered each other beneath the harsh, fluorescent lights, neither knew they were walking into the unraveling of her carefully constructed anonymity. Maggie's instinctive composure cracked, just enough to let the ghosts in, and that would lead to the revival of a name she thought she'd buried forever, Specter. What began as a routine morning errand would become a return to the invisible war she once swore she'd never fight again. The Norfolk Naval Station would never be the same after Maggie Chen stepped back into the shadows, this time to hunt an enemy who knew her better than anyone alive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The server room hummed with the steady rhythm of cooling fans and hard drives, a mechanical lullaby that Margaret Maggie Chen had grown to find comforting over the past 18 years. At 6:47 a.m., she was already 3 coffee cups deep into her day, hunched over a diagnostics screen in the Navy Logistics Center's IT department. The building itself was unremarkable, a low, beige structure that looked more like a community college than a critical hub of naval operations. But beneath its mundane exterior, data flowed like digital blood through the arteries of the Atlantic Fleet. "Morning, Maggie." Petty Officer First Class Jamie Ortiz appeared at her shoulder, clutching a travel mug that read, "Coffee, because adulting is hard." At 24, Jamie was all nervous energy and ambition, fresh from A school, with certifications in network security and enough enthusiasm to power a small destroyer. "Morning, Jamie." Maggie didn't look up from her screen, where lines of code scrolled past like digital rain. The server cluster in Building C crashed overnight. "3rd time this month." Jamie leaned closer, squinting at the screen. "Want me to run a standard diagnostic? Could be a memory leak in the—" "Already found it." Maggie's fingers danced across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Someone's been running unauthorized cryptocurrency mining software on the backup servers. Probably figured no one would notice the extra processing load." "How did you—" Jamie paused, watching the data streams that meant nothing to him but seemed to tell Maggie a complete story. That would take hours to trace through the logs. Maggie finally looked up, her dark eyes holding the kind of patience that came from explaining technical concepts to countless confused sailors over the years. Pattern recognition. When you've seen enough system failures, you start to recognize the signatures. This one's classic resource exhaustion with irregular spike patterns. She pulled up another window, revealing a hidden process buried deep in the system files. 3 keystrokes later, the rogue software was purged, and the server cluster stabilized. What should have taken a full forensics team half a day had taken her 7 minutes. "Jesus, Maggie, you're like the computer whisperer." Jamie shook his head in admiration. "I mean, I know my way around a network, but that was experience." Maggie closed the diagnostic window and stood, stretching her back. At 41, she maintained the posture and alertness of someone much younger, though close observers might notice how her eyes automatically tracked the security cameras in the room, or how she positioned herself with clear sightlines to both exits. "Coffee's getting cold. You should get some before the morning rush hits." As Jamie headed for the break room, Maggie allowed herself a small smile. The kid reminded her of herself once, eager, talented, and completely unaware of how much he didn't know about the world. But there was something endearing about his determination to prove himself worthy of the uniform he wore with such obvious pride. "Margaret!" Chief Walt Harris's gravelly voice boomed across the IT bay. At 58, the chief was old-school Navy through and through, with silver hair-buzzed regulation short and forearms decorated with anchor tattoos from his days on destroyers. "Need you to take a look at the communications array. Admiral's coming through for an inspection next week, and I don't want any unpleasant surprises." "What kind of surprises?" Maggie grabbed her toolkit, a weathered canvas bag that had seen more naval bases than most sailors. The kind where encrypted channels start broadcasting elevator music instead of tactical updates. Walt's expression was deadpan, but Maggie caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. Happened to the Fitzgerald last month. Very embarrassing. They walked through the corridors of the logistics center, past offices where junior officers stared at spreadsheets and senior petty officers coordinated the movement of everything from spare parts to personnel transfers. It was the unglamorous backbone of naval operations, the place where logistics met reality and where small problems could cascade into big ones if left unchecked. The communications room was a maze of server racks and cable management systems that would have looked chaotic to most people. To Maggie, it was as organized as a library. She pulled up the diagnostic interface and began tracing signal paths with the kind of unconscious competence that comes from years of practice. "You know," Walt said, settling into a nearby chair, "I've been watching you work for 3 years now, and I still can't figure out how you do what you do." "What do you mean?" Maggie's attention remained focused on the screen, but Walt caught a slight stiffening in her shoulders. "Most techs, they follow procedures. They run through checklists, test protocols, standard operating procedures. You," Walt paused, choosing his words carefully, "you work like someone who's seen these systems under stress. Real stress." Maggie's fingers stilled on the keyboard for just a moment. "I've been doing this for a long time, Chief. You pick things up." "Maybe." Walt's tone was conversational, but there was something underneath it. A veteran's intuition that something didn't quite add up. "It's just that old instincts die hard, you know. And some instincts you don't develop sitting behind a desk." The moment stretched between them, filled with the quiet hum of servers and the distant sound of footsteps in the corridor. Then Maggie resumed her work, pulling up a configuration panel that revealed the source of the communication glitch, a simple firmware conflict that could be resolved with a patch update. "There." She closed the diagnostic window and turned to face Walt. "Should be stable for the Admiral's visit." "Good work." Walt stood, but didn't move toward the door. "Maggie, you know if you ever need to talk about anything at all. I'm here, right?" Sometimes the Navy asks things of people that stick with them long after they're done asking. For a moment, Maggie's carefully maintained composure flickered, revealing something deeper. A kind of weariness that had nothing to do with fixing computers and everything to do with carrying weight that others couldn't see. "I appreciate that, Chief, really, but I'm exactly where I want to be." Walt nodded slowly. "Roger that. Just remember, the mission chooses you, not the other way around." That evening, Maggie found herself at Harbor Electronics, Emily Park's small computer repair shop in downtown Norfolk. The shop was cramped and cluttered, with towers of old computers and bins of spare parts creating narrow pathways between workbenches. It smelled of solder and possibility, and it was one of the few places where Maggie could truly relax. "How's the Navy treating you?" Emily asked, looking up from a laptop she was rebuilding. At 36, Emily had the kind of practical competence that came from running her own business and fixing problems with whatever tools were available. "Same as always. Computers break, I fix them, everyone pretends they understand what happened." Maggie picked up a circuit board from Emily's workbench, examining the tiny components with the kind of attention most people reserve for works of art. Must be nice, being needed but invisible. Sometimes. Maggie set down the circuit board and reached for a screwdriver. Other times you wonder if you're hiding or just hiding out. Emily glanced at her friend sharply. In the 3 years since Maggie had started helping out at the shop, she'd never heard her sound quite so reflective. "Everything okay?" "Just a long day." Maggie focused on the laptop she was repairing, but her mind was elsewhere. On Walt's words about old instincts, on the way Jamie looked at her like she was some kind of wizard, on the life she'd built from the pieces of the one she'd left behind. "Sometimes I think about what I'd be doing if I'd made different choices." "Well, you'd probably be fixing different computers somewhere else," Emily said with a smile. "Some people are just built to solve problems, Maggie. The question is whether you're solving the right ones." The fluorescent lights of Walmart cast everything in the harsh, democratic glow of American commerce. Maggie stood in the electronics section, comparing wireless routers with the methodical attention she brought to everything technical. She'd been debating between 2 models for 10 minutes, longer than it had taken her to diagnose and fix that morning's server crash, when she heard the voice that changed everything. "Well, I'll be damned." The voice was deep, commanding, and carried the kind of authority that came from decades of naval service. Maggie's entire body went rigid, her fingers tightening on the router box as recognition flooded through her like ice water. "It's been a long time, Specter." She turned slowly, knowing exactly what she would see but hoping against hope that she was wrong. Admiral Jonathan Iron Jack Reeves stood 15 feet away, resplendent in his dress blue uniform. At 62, he carried himself with the ramrod posture of a man who had commanded carrier strike groups and briefed presidents. His gray eyes held the kind of sharp intelligence that missed nothing and forgot less. For a moment, the Walmart electronics section might as well have been the bridge of a warship. The Admiral stood at attention and delivered a crisp, unmistakable salute, the kind reserved for heroes and legends. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs as she glanced around the store. A retired Navy veteran browsing phone cases had stopped what he was doing, his attention caught by the Admiral's bearing and the unfamiliar call sign. Two teenage employees stocking shelves were staring openly, probably wondering why a high-ranking officer was saluting a woman in jeans and a Norfolk Naval Station polo shirt. "Admiral." Maggie's voice was steady, but anyone who knew her well would have caught the strain underneath. "You're a long way from the Pentagon." "Visiting my granddaughter. She's starting at ODU this fall." Reeves lowered his salute but didn't relax his posture. "Never thought I'd run into you buying electronics at Walmart." "People need routers." Maggie's response was deliberately mundane, a verbal firewall against the conversation she knew he wanted to have. "Indeed they do." Reeves stepped closer, lowering his voice. "How have you been, Margaret?" "Really?" The use of her real name, not the call sign that had once struck fear into the hearts of enemy cyber warfare specialists, made her flinch slightly. In 18 years of civilian life, she'd almost convinced herself that Specter was just a story she'd heard once, about someone else entirely. "I've been fine, Admiral. Living quietly, staying out of trouble." "Fixing computers for the Navy, I heard." There was no judgment in his voice, only a kind of weary understanding. "Probably overqualified for the work." "I'm exactly qualified for the work I choose to do." Reeves nodded slowly. "You always were precise with your words. That hasn't changed." He paused, studying her face with the same intensity he'd once brought to analyzing satellite intelligence. "I heard you left service entirely." "No reserve status, no security clearance, no forwarding address." "Some people just want to disappear, Admiral." "And some people disappear because they're carrying weight that isn't theirs to carry." Reeves's voice gentled slightly. "What happened in the street wasn't your fault, Margaret. The mission parameters were impossible from the start." Maggie's jaw tightened. "I really can't discuss." "Of course you can't. But that doesn't mean you should forget that your actions saved 17,000 sailors that day. Whatever else happened, whatever you lost, that's what matters." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken history and the background noise of retail commerce. Other shoppers moved past them, oblivious to the fact that they were witnessing the meeting of two people who had once operated in the shadows of national security. "Uncle Jack?" The voice belonged to Jamie Ortiz, who had appeared at the end of the aisle carrying a shopping basket filled with energy drinks and frozen dinners. He stopped short when he saw Maggie, his expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and dawning realization. "Jamie!" Reeves' entire demeanor shifted, the stern Admiral transforming into a doting uncle. "What are you doing here?" "Grocery shopping. What are you—" "Wait!" Jamie's eyes moved between Reeves and Maggie, his quick mind making connections. "You two know each other?" "We've met," Maggie said quickly, but Reeves was already stepping forward. "Jamie, I'd like you to meet an old friend. Margaret, Chen, this is my nephew, Petty Officer Ortiz." "We work together," Jamie said slowly, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "Maggie's my supervisor in IT. She's the one I've been telling you about, the computer wizard." Reeves's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that so? Small world indeed." Quote, Maggie could see the wheels turning in Jamie's head, could watch him processing the implications of his uncle, a four-star admiral, treating his quiet IT supervisor with obvious respect and deference. The careful anonymity she'd maintained for 18 years was crumbling with each passing second. "I should go," Maggie said, setting down the router she'd been holding. "Nice seeing you again, Admiral." "Jamie, I'll see you tomorrow." "Wait, Maggie?" Jamie started, But she was already walking away, moving through the store with the kind of purposeful stride that discouraged pursuit. Behind her, she could hear Jamie's voice, urgent with questions. "Uncle Jack, what the hell was that about? How do you know Maggie, and what did you call her?" Reeves's response was too quiet to hear, but Maggie didn't need to listen. She knew exactly what he was telling his nephew, that some people were more than they appeared, that service took many forms, and that heroes sometimes wore civilian clothes and fixed computers for a living. By the time she reached her car, Maggie's hands were shaking. 18 years of careful invisibility, undone by a chance encounter in the router section of a Walmart. She sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, watching shoppers move through the parking lot and knowing that her quiet life had just ended as abruptly as it had begun. The Norfolk Naval Station Logistics Center had never been a hotbed of gossip, but by Tuesday morning, the story of the Walmart salute had spread through the building like a computer virus. Maggie arrived at her usual time, 0630 sharp, only to find clusters of personnel huddled in conversation that stopped abruptly when she passed. "Morning, Maggie." Jamie's greeting was careful, loaded with the weight of unasked questions. He'd been waiting by her workstation, a cup of coffee in hand and an expression that suggested he'd been rehearsing this conversation. "Morning." Maggie settled at her desk and powered up her workstation, maintaining the facade of normalcy, even as she felt the weight of curious stares from across the IT bay. "So," Jamie perched on the edge of a nearby desk, trying for casual and missing by a mile. "My uncle had some interesting things to say after you left yesterday." "I'm sure he did." Maggie's fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up the morning's trouble tickets. 3 printer malfunctions, a network slowdown in Building D, and something about the commissary's point-of-sale system freezing during checkout. Ordinary problems for an ordinary day in the life of an ordinary IT technician. "He said you served together, back when he was a commander." "A lot of people serve together, Jamie. It's a small navy." "He also said you were the best cyber warfare specialist he'd ever worked with." Jamie's voice dropped to just above a whisper. "Said you had a call sign. Specter." Maggie's typing paused for just a heartbeat, barely perceptible unless someone was watching for it. "Your uncle has an active imagination." "Does he?" Jamie leaned forward, his voice earnest. "Because I've been thinking about some things. Like how you always seem to know what's wrong with a system before you even run diagnostics. Or how you move around the classified networks like you helped design them. Or how you can spot a security vulnerability from across the room." "Experience," Maggie said, the same word she'd used with Chief Walt, but it sounded less convincing now, worn thin by repetition. "Maybe. Or maybe there's more to Margaret Chen than fixing printers and untangling network cables." Before Maggie could respond, Chief Walt's voice cut across the IT bay. "Chen!" "My office, 5 minutes." The chief's office was a shrine to 3 decades of naval service, plaques, photographs, and challenge coins covering every available surface. Walt closed the door behind them and activated the white noise generator that ensured their conversation would remain private. "We need to talk." Walt's expression was grim. "About yesterday, about what happened at Walmart, and about what it means." "I don't know what you—" "Cut the shit, Margaret." Walt's voice was flat, the tone of a senior enlisted man who'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. "Admiral Reeves doesn't salute computer technicians, and people don't disappear from active duty with no forwarding address unless they're running from something or someone." Maggie met his eyes steadily. "What do you want me to say, Chief?" "I want you to acknowledge that you've been spotted and that the wrong people are going to notice." Walt moved to his desk and pulled out a manila folder. "This came through this morning. Special request for your personnel file from some Pentagon office I've never heard of. They want everything. Service record, security clearance history, current duty assignments." Quote, the folder felt heavier than it should have when Maggie took it. Inside was a routine-looking form, but her trained eye caught the details that mattered. The routing codes that suggested intelligence community involvement, the priority stamps that indicated someone very important was asking questions. "They're phishing," she said finally. "Maybe, or maybe they already know what they're looking for and they're just confirming details." Walt leaned back in his chair. "Either way, your cover's blown. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Nothing. I'm going to keep my head down and do my job. And if they don't let you? Maggie set the folder on Walt's desk and stood. Then I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Margaret, Walt's voice stopped her at the door. I don't know what you did before you came here, and I don't need to know, but I've got 40 people in this department who depend on me to keep them safe. If your past is going to put them at risk, it won't. Maggie's voice carried absolute certainty. Whatever happens, it won't touch your people. That afternoon brought another complication. Maggie was troubleshooting a server issue when her email chimed with an unusual message, a routine tech support request that wasn't routine at all. The language was standard IT help desk terminology, but buried in the text were phrases that made her blood run cold. Unauthorized access attempts, legacy system vulnerabilities, and requiring immediate attention from senior personnel. It was a probe, disguised as bureaucracy. Someone was testing to see if Margaret Chen, the IT technician, would recognize the coded language that Specter, the cyber warfare specialist, would understand immediately. She deleted the message without responding, but the damage was done. Someone knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. The question was whether they represented an opportunity or a threat. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Heard an interesting story today. Customer said his Navy buddy saw Admiral Reeves salute some woman at Walmart. Small world, right? Maggie stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Very small. See you tonight? Always. As she walked to her car that evening, Maggie felt the familiar weight of being watched. It was probably paranoia. 18 years of civilian life should have dulled those instincts. But as she'd learned long ago, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not actually out to get you. The quiet life she'd built so carefully was coming apart at the seams, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do to stop it. The only question now was whether she'd be forced back into the shadows willingly, or if someone would drag her there against her will. Either way, Specter was about to wake up, and that scared her more than any enemy she'd ever faced. Commander Sarah Whitaker arrived at the Norfolk Naval Station Logistics Center at precisely 0800 hours, carrying herself with the kind of crisp efficiency that suggested she viewed time as a tactical resource not to be wasted. At 43, she had the lean build of someone who maintained PT standards not because regulations required it, but because physical fitness was simply another weapon in her arsenal. Her uniform bore the insignia of Navy Cyber Command, and her briefcase looked like it could survive a direct missile strike. I'm here to conduct a routine technology audit, she announced to Chief Walt, presenting credentials that looked official enough but somehow felt wrong, like a perfectly forged signature that was technically accurate but lacked the subtle imperfections of authenticity. We weren't scheduled for any audits, Walt replied, but his tone suggested he knew better than to argue with a commander carrying Pentagon authorization codes. Last-minute directive, high priority. Whitaker's smile was professional and utterly without warmth. I'll need to speak with your senior IT personnel, starting with Margaret Chen. 30 minutes later, Maggie found herself in the base's secure conference room, facing a woman who clearly knew far more than she was letting on. Whitaker had spread several folders across the polished table, their contents carefully positioned so that only she could read them. But Maggie caught glimpses of classification stamps and code names that made her stomach tighten. Your service record makes for fascinating reading, Whitaker said without preamble, though there are some interesting gaps. Large portions redacted, entire deployments that officially never happened. I don't know what you're talking about. Maggie's voice was steady, but her hands remained carefully folded in her lap, a deliberate choice to prevent any unconscious fidgeting that might betray nervousness. Of course you don't. Whitaker opened one of the folders and slid a photograph across the table. It showed a younger Maggie in Navy working blues, standing next to a computer terminal in what was obviously a high-security facility. This was taken aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, circa 2006. You were part of a joint task force investigating cyber intrusions into carrier strike group communications. Maggie glanced at the photograph without touching it. I worked on a lot of communication systems. It was my job. Yes, it was, and you were remarkably good at it. Whitaker produced another document, this one bearing so many classification markings that even looking at it felt illegal. Operation Ghost Protocol. Ring any bells? The name hit Maggie like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. Ghost Protocol had been her first major cyber warfare mission, a deep penetration attack on Iranian naval command systems that had prevented a confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz. Officially, it had never happened. Unofficially, it had probably prevented a war. I'm afraid I can't discuss classified operations. Even ones where you saved 17,000 American lives? Whitaker's voice carried a note of genuine respect. The Iranian torpedo guidance systems that mysteriously failed during their training exercise near our carrier group, the communication blackout that left their fast attack craft blind and confused? That was you, wasn't it, Specter? Hearing her old call sign spoken aloud in this sterile conference room was like being struck by lightning. For a moment, Maggie was 23 again, her fingers flying across a keyboard, while Iranian cyber warfare specialists tried desperately to regain control of their own systems. She could still remember the taste of adrenaline and coffee, the weight of knowing that millions of lives hung on her ability to stay one step ahead of enemy hackers. "That was a long time ago," Maggie said finally. "Not so long that we've forgotten, and not so long that the threats have disappeared." Whitaker closed the folder and leaned forward. "We need you back, Margaret. Navy Cyber Command is facing challenges that require your particular skill set." "I'm exactly where I want to be. Fixing printer jams and resetting passwords?" Whitaker's tone sharpened. "You're one of the most talented cyber warfare specialists in naval history, and you're wasting that talent on routine IT support. It's honest work. Quote, so is defending your country from people who want to destroy it." Whitaker opened another folder, this one containing satellite imagery and technical diagrams that made Maggie's blood run cold. "We're tracking coordinated attacks on military networks worldwide. Someone with serious resources and inside knowledge is probing our defenses, looking for weaknesses." Despite herself, Maggie found her attention drawn to the technical details. The attack patterns showed a sophistication that worried her. These weren't random hackers or state-sponsored amateurs. Someone with real expertise was orchestrating these intrusions. "The attacks are specifically targeting naval operations," Whitaker continued. "Fleet deployment schedules, weapons systems diagnostics, communication protocols. Someone is mapping our capabilities with surgical precision." "Then you should find whoever's doing it and stop them." "We're trying, but we need someone who thinks like they do, someone who understands how to wage war in cyberspace." Whitaker's voice softened slightly. "We need you, Specter." Maggie stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I told you that's not who I am anymore." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Then who are you?" Whitaker remained seated, her expression calm. "Margaret Chen, IT technician? Someone who fixes computers and pretends she never saved the world?" "Someone who learned that saving the world comes with a price." "And what price was that?" For a moment, Maggie's carefully maintained composure cracked. Whitaker caught a glimpse of something raw and painful. Guilt that had been carried for 18 years. Survivor's remorse that had driven one of the Navy's best cyber warriors into self-imposed exile. "I can't help you," Maggie said quietly. "Find someone else." "There is no one else. Not for this." Whitaker stood as well, her military bearing making her seem taller than her actual height. "The threats we're facing require someone with your experience, your instincts, your understanding of how these systems really work. My instincts got good people killed. Your instincts saved millions of lives. Whatever happened in your last mission is none of your business." Maggie moved toward the door, but Whitaker's next words stopped her. "What if I told you that we think the person orchestrating these attacks is someone you know, someone from your past who has intimate knowledge of our cyber warfare capabilities?" Maggie's hand froze on the door handle. "That's impossible. Everyone from my unit is either dead or accounted for." "Everyone from your official unit, yes, but there were joint operations, weren't there? Allied personnel who worked alongside your team?" Whitaker's voice carried the weight of information she wasn't supposed to have. "People who might have felt betrayed when political winds shifted and alliances changed?" The implications hit Maggie like a sledgehammer. If someone from her past was behind these attacks, someone who knew her methods, her capabilities, her vulnerabilities, then running away wouldn't protect anyone. It would just make her a target waiting to be found. "I need time to think," Maggie said finally. "Time is something we don't have much of." Whitaker gathered her folders with practiced efficiency. The attacks are escalating. Each probe is more sophisticated than the last. Whoever's doing this is building towards something big. How big? Fleet-wide communications blackout, navigation systems compromised. Weapons platforms turned against each other. Whitaker's expression was grim. The kind of cyber attack that could cripple our entire naval capability. Maggie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the conference room's air conditioning. A coordinated attack on that scale would be devastating, not just to military operations but to global stability. The U.S. Navy was the backbone of international maritime security. Without it, shipping lanes would become war zones, and regional conflicts would explode into global catastrophes. "I'll be in touch," Whitaker said, moving toward the door. "But don't wait too long to decide, Margaret. The enemy certainly won't." After Whitaker left, Maggie remained in the conference room for several minutes, staring at the polished table where classified documents had revealed a threat she'd hoped never to face again. The quiet life she'd built was crumbling around her, and there didn't seem to be any way to stop it. When she finally returned to the IT bay, Jamie was waiting with barely contained excitement. "Was that really Navy Cyber Command?" he asked, his voice pitched low to avoid attracting attention from their colleagues. "Just a routine audit," Maggie replied, but her tone lacked conviction. "Bullshit. I saw her credentials. That was Commander Sarah Whitaker. She's practically a legend in cyber warfare circles." Jamie's eyes were bright with curiosity and something that might have been awe. "What did she want with you?" "Nothing important." But as Maggie settled back at her workstation, she knew that nothing would ever be unimportant again. The war she'd tried to leave behind had found her, and this time, there might not be anywhere left to run. The intrusion alert came at 0247 hours, when the logistics center was supposed to be secure and quiet. Maggie's phone buzzed with an automated message from the base's cybersecurity system, a routine notification that would normally be handled by the overnight duty officer. But something about the alert pattern made her sit up in bed, instantly awake with the kind of adrenaline rush that came from 18 years of conditioning. She was dressed and driving toward the base within 10 minutes, her mind already running through possible scenarios. Network intrusions at military facilities were typically either routine probes by foreign intelligence services or mistakes by authorized users accessing systems they didn't understand. But the timestamp and target specificity of this alert suggested something more deliberate. The security checkpoint waved her through without question. After 18 years, she was as much a fixture of the base as the buildings themselves. The logistics center was eerily quiet, illuminated only by emergency lighting and the glow of computer monitors. She made her way to the main server room, where banks of equipment hummed with the constant flow of data that kept naval operations running smoothly. The intrusion had targeted the Fleet Deployment Scheduling System, a classified network that tracked the movement and readiness status of every ship in the Atlantic Fleet. Someone had attempted to access real-time positioning data, maintenance schedules, and crew rotation information, the kind of intelligence that could be used to predict when and where naval assets would be most vulnerable. But it was the method of intrusion that made Maggie's blood run cold. The attack signature was elegant and precise, using a combination of social engineering and technical exploitation that bypassed standard security protocols. The intruder had spoofed authentication credentials, created false user accounts, and established persistent backdoors that would allow continued access even after the initial breach was discovered. It was the work of someone who understood not just how these systems worked, but how they had been designed to work. Someone who had helped build them. Couldn't sleep either? Maggie spun around to find Jamie standing in the doorway, carrying a coffee cup and wearing the rumpled clothes of someone who had been roused from sleep by the same alert system. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Same thing you are, I think. This isn't a routine probe, is it?" Jamie moved to a nearby workstation and began pulling up network logs. "The attack patterns are too sophisticated. Whoever did this knows our systems inside and out." Maggie watched him work, noting the efficiency with which he navigated the security interfaces. Jamie was good, better than most technicians with twice his experience. But as he traced the intrusion paths, she could see him missing the subtle indicators that would reveal the true scope of the breach. "Here," she said, moving to stand beside him, "you're looking at the obvious attack vectors, but the real damage is happening in the background processes." Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, revealing layers of malicious code that had been hidden beneath routine system operations. The intruder hadn't just stolen data. They had planted surveillance tools that would monitor all future communications through the compromised networks. Jesus, Jamie breathed, watching the extent of the breach unfold on his screen. This isn't just espionage, this is preparation for something bigger. Much bigger. Maggie's voice was grim as she traced the attack's digital fingerprints. What she found made her stomach clench with a mixture of fear and recognition. The code structure, the exploitation techniques, even the specific vulnerabilities that had been targeted, all of it bore the hallmarks of someone she had hoped never to encounter again. Someone who had once been an ally, a friend, and ultimately a betrayer, whose actions had cost lives and shattered her faith in the people she served alongside. Caleb, she whispered, the name carrying the weight of old pain and fresh terror. What? Jamie looked up from his screen, confused by the sudden change in her demeanor. Nothing. I need to make some calls. Maggie moved toward the door, but Jamie's voice stopped her. Maggie, wait, you know who did this, don't you? Quote. She paused, torn between the need for secrecy that had protected her for 18 years and the growing realization that silence might no longer be an option. I know the signature, she said finally, and if I'm right, this is just the beginning. 2 hours later, Commander Whitaker arrived at the base with a small team of cyber warfare specialists and a sense of urgency that transformed the quiet logistics center into a hive of activity. She found Maggie in the secure conference room, surrounded by printouts and technical diagrams that mapped the full extent of the intrusion. How bad is it? Whitaker asked without preamble. Worse than you think. The breach wasn't just about stealing information. It was about establishing permanent access to our command and control systems. Maggie gestured to a network diagram that showed compromised nodes throughout the fleet's communication infrastructure. Whoever did this now has the ability to monitor our operations in real time and potentially disrupt them at will. Any idea who's responsible? Maggie hesitated, then pulled up a file containing attack signatures and code samples. Caleb Morgan, former Royal Navy cyber warfare specialist, worked joint operations with us from 2004 to 2008. He was part of the task force that developed many of the protocols this attack exploited. Whitaker's expression darkened. Morgan went missing 3 years ago after a joint operation in the Baltic went sideways. Intelligence assumed he was dead. Apparently not. And apparently he's decided that his former allies are now his enemies. What's his grievance? Political fallout from a mission that officially never happened. His government disavowed the operation, his career was destroyed, and several of his team members were killed in the aftermath. Maggie's voice carried the weight of someone who had lived through similar betrayals. Some people handle that kind of abandonment better than others. Whitaker studied the technical evidence spread across the table. If it is Morgan, what's his endgame? What's he building toward? Total systems compromise. He knows our networks well enough to take them down completely. Communications, navigation, weapons control, everything. A coordinated attack could leave the entire Atlantic fleet blind and helpless. How long do we have? Based on the sophistication of this probe, not long. He's mapping our current capabilities and identifying vulnerabilities. Once he has what he needs, Maggie shrugged, hours, maybe days. Then we need to stop him. We need to find him first, and Caleb Morgan is very good at not being found. Whitaker leaned back in her chair, studying Maggie with calculating eyes. But you're better, aren't you? You trained alongside him, worked with him, know how he thinks. That was a long time ago. Some skills don't fade. Some knowledge doesn't expire. Whitaker's voice carried the weight of command authority. I need you to help us stop him, Margaret. Not as a consultant or advisor, but as an active participant. I told you. I know what you told me. But circumstances have changed. This isn't about recruiting you back into service. This is about preventing a catastrophic attack on our naval forces. Whitaker stood, her expression implacable. Caleb Morgan is using your knowledge against us, your techniques, your innovations, your understanding of our systems. The only way to stop him is with someone who knows those same systems just as well. Maggie felt the walls closing in around her, the careful distance she'd maintained from her past collapsing under the weight of present necessity. 18 years of quiet service, of fixing printers and resetting passwords, of being invisible and ordinary, all of it swept away by the reappearance of a ghost she'd thought was buried forever. "If I help you," she said slowly, "it's not because I want to return to active duty, it's because people will die if I don't." "Understood." "And I do this my way, with my team, using my methods." "What team?" Whitaker asked. Maggie glanced toward the door, where Jamie was waiting in the corridor with barely contained excitement and anxiety. "People I trust. People who know these systems and won't ask questions about classified operations." "Done. What do you need?" For the first time in 18 years, Margaret Chen allowed herself to think like Specter again. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture straightened, her voice carried new authority, and her eyes took on the focused intensity of someone who had once waged war in the digital realm. "Time, resources, and direct access to fleet communication systems," she said, "and a secure workspace where we can operate without interference." "Consider it done." As Whitaker left to make arrangements, Maggie remained in the conference room, staring at the evidence of Caleb's intrusion. Somewhere in the digital shadows, an old enemy was preparing to strike at the heart of American naval power, and for the first time in 18 years, she was going to strike back. The quiet life of Margaret Chen was over. Specter was about to return to the war. The secure workspace that Whitaker had arranged was a study in controlled paranoia, a windowless room deep within the base's command center, surrounded by signal-blocking materials that would prevent any electronic surveillance. Banks of computer equipment lined the walls, connected to secure networks that bypassed the standard base infrastructure. It was the kind of environment where careers were made or destroyed, where decisions involving national security were reduced to lines of code and network protocols. Maggie arrived to find Jamie already there, his expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension as he took in the high-security surroundings. "This is really happening, isn't it?" he said. "Whatever you used to do, whatever you really are, it's all coming back." "Some things never really leave," Maggie replied, settling at the primary workstation. The interface was familiar yet different, evolved versions of systems she had helped design years earlier. "Are you sure you want to be part of this? Once you're read into certain programs, there's no going back to routine IT support." "Are you kidding? This is what I joined the Navy for." "The chance to actually make a difference." Jamie's voice carried the enthusiasm of youth and the conviction of someone who had never seen the real cost of making that difference. "Making a difference in cyber warfare means people live or die based on your ability to type faster and think clearer than the enemy," Maggie said quietly. "It means carrying the weight of decisions that affect millions of people you'll never meet. It means—" She was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Whitaker, who entered the workspace carrying a briefcase and wearing the grim expression of someone bearing bad news. "We've had another intrusion," Whitaker announced without preamble. This time, Morgan targeted the USS George Washington's navigation systems while she was conducting exercises off the Virginia coast. Maggie's hand stilled on the keyboard. "How bad?" The carrier lost GPS guidance for 17 minutes and came within 800 yards of a container ship before manual navigation restored course control. Whitaker set her briefcase on the table and opened it, revealing classified documents and satellite imagery. If this had happened during combat operations or in heavy shipping traffic. Hundreds of deaths, international incident, possible war. Maggie's voice was flat, professional. "Caleb's escalating faster than I expected. He's not just probing our defenses anymore. He's demonstrating his ability to cause catastrophic failures. Which brings me to why I'm here." Whitaker's expression hardened. "My superiors are no longer viewing your participation as optional. The Secretary of the Navy has authorized me to compel your cooperation through whatever means necessary." Jamie looked confused. "What does that mean?" "It means," Maggie said, her voice carrying a note of bitter understanding, "that if I don't volunteer to help stop Caleb, I'll be subpoenaed back into active duty whether I want to or not. The Uniform Code of Military Justice is very clear about the obligations of former service members during national emergencies," Whitaker confirmed. "Your knowledge and expertise are considered critical national security assets. We can't allow personal preferences to override operational necessity. Even for someone who left service voluntarily 18 years ago? Especially for someone with your specific background and capabilities." Whitaker pulled out a document bearing official seals and signatures. "This is a direct order from SEC and AV. You will provide full cooperation in identifying, tracking, and neutralizing the cyber warfare threat posed by Caleb Morgan. Maggie stared at the document without touching it. The language was bureaucratic and official, but the meaning was clear. Her quiet exile was over. Her choice had been removed, and she was being dragged back into a world she had sworn never to enter again. "You're making a mistake," she said finally. "Why? Because you're not the same person you were 18 years ago?" "Because the reason I left hasn't changed. People who work with me tend to die, Commander. My last mission cost 6 lives, including my closest friend and partner. Are you prepared to accept that responsibility?" For the first time since entering the room, Whitaker's composure faltered slightly. "What happened on your last mission?" Maggie was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond the secure walls of the workspace. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of old pain and unhealed wounds. "Operation Silent Storm. Joint U.S.-UK cyber operation targeting a terrorist network's communication infrastructure in the Mediterranean. My partner, Lieutenant Commander Rachel Torres, was running parallel infiltration of their financial systems while I handled their operational networks." "What went wrong?" "Politics. The operation was compromised by intelligence leaks, possibly deliberate. The terrorists knew we were coming and had prepared countermeasures." Maggie's hands clenched unconsciously. Rachel's infiltration triggered a trap, malicious code that traced back through our secure connections and identified her physical location. They found her safe house in Cyprus and... She didn't finish the sentence, but the implications hung in the air like smoke. Jamie looked stricken while Whitaker's expression remained carefully neutral. 6 other members of our support team were killed in the aftermath, Maggie continued. All because I made the wrong call about network security protocols. All because I trusted systems and people that turned out to be compromised. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? Maggie's voice sharpened. I was the mission commander. The operational decisions were mine. The responsibility for their safety was mine. She finally looked directly at Whitaker. That's why I disappeared, Commander. Not because I was afraid of the enemy, but because I was afraid of myself. The workspace fell silent except for the quiet hum of electronic equipment. Jamie stared at Maggie with new understanding, seeing her not just as the competent IT supervisor he'd known, but as someone who had carried the weight of command decisions and their tragic consequences. I'm sorry for your loss, Whitaker said finally, but that doesn't change the current situation. Caleb Morgan is planning something that could cripple our entire naval capability. Without your help, thousands more people could die. And with my help, the people closest to me will be the first targets. Maggie gestured toward Jamie. He's young, talented, and completely unprepared for the kind of warfare Caleb specializes in. How long do you think he'll survive once Caleb realizes I'm back in the game? That's my choice to make, Jamie said quietly. His voice carried new determination, tempered by understanding of what they were really facing, and I choose to help. You don't understand. I understand that you're afraid of losing someone else you care about. I get that. But running away from the fight didn't save the people who died in the last 18 years while you were hiding. Jamie's words were harsh, but not unkind. It just meant you weren't there to protect them. The observation hit Maggie like a physical blow. How many cyber attacks had occurred while she fixed printers? How many naval personnel had died in conflicts she might have prevented? How many threats had gone unchallenged because she was too afraid to step back into the arena where she belonged? The decision has been made, Whitaker said, her tone suggesting the conversation was over. The question now is whether you'll cooperate willingly or under duress. Either way, the mission proceeds. Maggie looked around the secure workspace at the advanced computer systems that represented the cutting edge of cyber warfare technology, at Jamie's determined expression, at the classified documents that laid out the scope of Caleb's threat. For 18 years, she had tried to convince herself that walking away had been the right choice, but sitting in this room, facing the reality of what Caleb could accomplish if left unchecked, that conviction finally crumbled. If I do this, she said slowly, I need guarantees. My team operates with complete autonomy. No interference from Pentagon bureaucrats, no second-guessing of tactical decisions, no political oversight of operational methods. Done. And when this is over, when Caleb is stomped, I go back to my quiet life. No more recruitment attempts, no more national emergencies that require my expertise. Agreed. Maggie stood and walked to the primary workstation, her fingers hovering over the keyboard that would connect her to networks she hadn't accessed in 18 years. For a moment, she felt the weight of every decision that had led to this point. The friends lost, the enemies made, the quiet years spent in exile from the world where she truly belonged. Then she began to type, and Specter emerged from the shadows to wage war once again. The first sign of the attack came at 1,347 hours during what should have been a routine readiness exercise. The USS Leyte Gulf was conducting missile defense drills 40 nautical miles southeast of Norfolk when her Aegis combat system suddenly went dark. Within seconds, similar reports flooded the Fleet Operations Center from ships throughout the exercise area. Navigation systems failing, communication arrays going offline, weapons platforms reverting to manual control. Maggie was reviewing network traffic patterns when the emergency alerts began cascading across her screens. The scope of the simultaneous failures was breathtaking in its precision and terrifying in its implications. Caleb hadn't just infiltrated individual ships. He had orchestrated a coordinated attack on the fleet's entire command and control infrastructure. "Jesus Christ," Jamie breathed, watching the status board transform from green to red as ship after ship reported critical system failures. "How is this possible?" "Because Caleb helped design these systems," Maggie replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she traced the attack vectors in real time. "He knows exactly which protocols to target for maximum disruption." Commander Whitaker burst into the workspace, her usual composure shattered by the magnitude of the crisis unfolding throughout the fleet. "How many ships are affected?" 17 vessels and counting, Maggie reported without looking up from her screens. "Destroyers, cruisers, the carrier George Washington. He's hitting everything with advanced combat systems." "Can you stop it?" "I'm trying to understand it first." Maggie pulled up a tactical display showing the positions of all affected vessels. The pattern was deliberate and strategic. Caleb had targeted the ships with the most sophisticated defensive capabilities, leaving the fleet effectively blind to incoming threats. This isn't random. He's clearing the field for something bigger. The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. A coordinated cyber attack that disabled the fleet's most capable defenders could only serve one purpose: to create a window of vulnerability that could be exploited by conventional forces. "Where are the Russian submarines?" Whitaker demanded, reaching for her secure phone. 3 Akula-class boats, last detected moving south from the Arctic, Jamie reported, pulling up intelligence updates on his secondary screen. "They've been shadowing our exercises for the past week." "And Chinese naval movements?" "Type 055 destroyers operating near international waters, claiming routine training exercises." Maggie watched the tactical picture develop with growing alarm. Caleb's cyber attack wasn't just about proving his capabilities. It was the opening move in a larger confrontation that could escalate into open warfare if the fleet remained defenseless. "I need admin access to the fleet command network," she said, turning to Whitaker. "Not just local systems. I need to reach every affected ship simultaneously." "That requires SECNAV authorization." "Then get it, now. Because in about 10 minutes, those disabled ships are going to start bumping into each other. And in 20 minutes, enemy submarines are going to realize they have a clear shot at a crippled carrier group." Whitaker was already dialing as Maggie turned back to her workstation. The attack code was elegant and vicious, designed to exploit vulnerabilities in the fleet's integrated combat systems that had been theoretical weaknesses when she and Caleb had worked together years earlier. He was using her own innovations against the Navy she had sworn to defend. "Authorization granted," Whitaker announced. "You have full network access." "Jamie, I need you to monitor communication channels and report any unusual submarine activity. If you see sonar contacts moving into attack position, tell me immediately." "Got it." Maggie's hands moved across the keyboard with the fluid precision of a concert pianist, her mind shifting into the focused state that had once made her the Navy's most feared cyber warrior. She began by isolating the affected systems, cutting them off from the compromised networks before Caleb could inflict further damage. Then came the delicate work of purging his malicious code while preserving the legitimate software that kept the ships operational. It was like performing surgery on a patient while under fire. Every command had to be perfect. Every decision had to be instantaneous, and any mistake could prove fatal for thousands of sailors. "Sonar, contact!" Jamie's voice cut through her concentration. Russian submarine, bearing 095, ranged 12,000 yards and closing on the George Washington. How much time do I have? Maggie asked, not pausing in her work. At current speed, maybe 8 minutes before they reach optimal torpedo range. 8 minutes to restore defensive systems to a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier while enemy submarines maneuvered into attack position. It was the kind of impossible deadline that separated legends from footnotes in naval history. Maggie's approach was methodical but aggressive, bypassing normal security protocols and administrative safeguards that would have slowed her progress. She carved through Caleb's defenses like a knife through silk, her code moving through the network with predatory grace. Each system she liberated sent a surge of satisfaction through her. This was what she had been born to do. This was where she belonged. Communications restored to the Leyte Gulf, Jamie reported. They're reporting partial weapons system recovery. George Washington is next. Maggie's concentration was absolute, her awareness narrowed to the flow of data across her screens and the steady countdown in her mind. 6 minutes until the submarine reached firing position. 5 minutes. 4. Aegis system coming online, she announced, watching defensive protocols cascade through the carrier's computer networks. They should have full radar and missile defense in 30 seconds. The transformation was visible on the tactical display as green indicators began replacing red ones throughout the fleet. Ships that had been dead in the water suddenly came alive with renewed purpose, their sensors reaching out to identify threats and their weapons systems preparing to engage hostile targets. Contact. The George Washington has multiple submarine contacts on sonar, Jamie reported with barely contained excitement. They're lighting them up with active sonar and requesting weapons-free authorization. Tell them to hold fire unless directly threatened, Whitaker ordered. We don't want to start a shooting war over a cyber attack. But even as she spoke, everyone in the room understood that the shooting war had already begun. It was just being fought with keyboards instead of missiles. And for the first time in 18 years, Specter was winning. All fleet systems restored, Maggie announced, leaning back in her chair with the exhausted satisfaction of someone who had just pulled off the impossible. Caleb's attack has been neutralized. Outstanding work, Whitaker said, and there was genuine admiration in her voice. How did you counter his attack so quickly? Because I know how he thinks. His techniques are sophisticated, but they're based on exploiting weaknesses in systems we both helped design. Maggie's expression darkened. The problem is, now he knows I'm back in the game, and next time, he'll be ready for me. The secure phone rang, and Whitaker answered with crisp efficiency. After a brief conversation, she hung up and turned to address the room. SecNav wants a full briefing on the attack and our response. The President has been notified, and the Joint Chiefs are convening an emergency session. She paused, studying Maggie with calculating eyes. They want to know if we can go on the offensive against Morgan. Meaning? Meaning it's time to stop playing defense and start hunting the hunter. Maggie felt a familiar chill run down her spine, the sensation of standing at the edge of an abyss, knowing that the next step would change everything. For 18 years she had hidden from this moment. Now it had found her anyway, and there was nowhere left to run. If we go after Caleb directly, it won't be a clean operation, she warned. He's not just a rogue hacker. He's a trained military cyber warfare specialist with resources and allies we can't predict. Hunting him means entering his world, playing by his rules, accepting casualties. Understood. And it means I stop being Margaret Chen, IT technician, and become Specter full-time. There's no coming back from that. Whitaker's expression was implacable. The decision has already been made. The only question is whether you're ready to finish what he started. Maggie looked around the secure workspace that had become her command center, at the screens showing restored fleet operations, at Jamie's determined expression. The quiet life she had built was gone, burned away by the necessities of war and the demands of duty she had never quite escaped. Then let's go hunting, she said, and the transformation from Margaret Chen to Specter was complete. The planning session began at 0200 hours in a conference room so classified that its existence was known only to a handful of people with security clearances that went beyond top secret. Maggie found herself surrounded by personnel she had never seen before. Analysts from the Defense Intelligence Agency, operators from naval special warfare, and technical specialists whose job descriptions consisted entirely of euphemisms. "Ladies and gentlemen," Commander Whitaker began, "we are here to plan the capture or elimination of Caleb Morgan, a former Allied cyber warfare specialist who has declared war on the United States Navy." The briefing material spread across the table painted a picture of an enemy who had evolved far beyond his original capabilities. Since disappearing 3 years earlier, Caleb had established connections with criminal networks, state-sponsored hacking groups, and mercenary organizations that provided him with resources and protection. He operated from mobile command centers, used encrypted communication networks that defied traditional surveillance, and employed operational security measures that made him nearly impossible to track. Intelligence suggests Morgan is currently operating from somewhere in Eastern Europe, a DIA analyst reported. Possibly the Baltic states, where he has connections from his time with NATO Cyber Command. But his exact location remains unknown. "What about his infrastructure?" Maggie asked, studying satellite imagery and network diagrams. "He's orchestrating sophisticated attacks on hardened military systems. That requires serious computing power and secure communications. We've identified at least 12 server farms across 3 continents that show signs of his activity," a technical specialist replied. "But he's using advanced obfuscation techniques and constantly shifting his operational footprint. Then we go after his methods, not his location." Maggie stood and moved to the wall-mounted displays, her mind shifting into tactical mode. "Caleb's greatest strength is also his greatest weakness. He's using systems and protocols we both helped develop. That means I can predict his next moves." She began sketching network diagrams and attack vectors on the digital whiteboard, her understanding of cyber warfare flowing into a comprehensive battle plan. "He'll have multiple layers of protection, decoy servers, false identities, misdirection protocols. But underneath all that, he's still using core techniques from our old playbook." Her marker moved across the board with confident strokes. "If we can force him to react to our moves instead of executing his own plan, we can trace his responses back to their source." "What kind of reaction are you talking about?" Whitaker asked. "We make him angry. We attack something he cares about. His reputation, his resources, his sense of superiority." Maggie's expression carried a predatory intensity that reminded everyone in the room why she had once been the Navy's most dangerous cyber warrior. "Caleb always was arrogant. If we can bruise his ego enough, he'll make mistakes." The plan that emerged from the next 4 hours of discussion was audacious in its scope and terrifying in its implications. They would launch a coordinated cyber offensive against Caleb's known infrastructure, using techniques that bordered on cyber warfare crimes under international law. The goal wasn't just to stop his current operations, but to draw him into direct confrontation, where his location could be determined and targeted. "I'll need a specialized team," Maggie said, as the formal briefing concluded. "People who understand advanced network penetration and aren't afraid to operate in legal gray areas." "You can have anyone you want," Whitaker replied. "I want Jamie." The room erupted in objections. Jamie was too young, too inexperienced, too valuable to risk on such a dangerous operation. But Maggie cut through the protests with quiet authority. "Jamie knows our current systems better than anyone except me. He's quick, adaptable, and hasn't been corrupted by years of bureaucratic procedures." She paused, her voice carrying the weight of command decision. "And I trust him." "The kid's never been in combat," a special warfare operator pointed out. "Neither had I, until the first time someone tried to kill me through a computer network." Maggie's tone was flat, final. "This is cyber warfare, not a boarding action. What matters isn't physical courage. It's mental agility and technical competence." 2 hours later, Maggie and Jamie found themselves in an even more secure facility, surrounded by computer equipment that represented the cutting edge of offensive cyber capabilities. The workstations were connected to networks that officially didn't exist, running software that would never appear in any congressional budget hearing. "Are you sure about this?" Jamie asked, his voice carrying new uncertainty as he took in the implications of their surroundings. "No. But certainty is a luxury we can't afford." Maggie settled at the primary workstation and began bringing systems online. "Caleb is planning something bigger than fleet disruption. The attack yesterday was just a demonstration. If we don't stop him now, his next move could trigger a shooting war." What do you need me to do? Monitor his defensive networks while I penetrate his operational systems. When he realizes we're inside his infrastructure, he'll try to trace us back to our source. Your job is to make sure that tracer leads him exactly where we want him to go. They worked in focused silence for the next several hours, their efforts coordinated with the precision of a synchronized attack. Maggie's assault on Caleb's systems was surgical and devastating. She dismantled his protective barriers with the same calm efficiency she had once brought to defending American networks. Meanwhile, Jamie constructed elaborate deception protocols that would misdirect Caleb's inevitable counterattack. The first sign that their plan was working came when Caleb's systems began fighting back with increased sophistication and obvious personal anger. His defensive measures became more aggressive, his countermeasures more focused on causing damage rather than simply repelling invasion. He's taking this personally, Jamie observed, watching attack patterns that showed clear signs of emotional compromise. Good. Angry hackers make mistakes. Maggie's concentration never wavered from her screens. Keep monitoring his traces. The moment he tries to identify our location, we'll have him. The digital battle raged through the night, invisible to the outside world but no less intense than any conventional military engagement. Networks crashed and recovered. Data flowed and was corrupted. Virtual weapons clashed in cyberspace with consequences that could reshape the real world. And finally, at 0547 hours, Caleb made the mistake Maggie had been waiting for. Got him, she announced quietly. He's trying to penetrate our security through a hardened military network, which means he thinks we're operating from a classified facility. The trace protocols are active. We should have his location within minutes. The coordinates that appeared on their screens showed a position in the Baltic Sea, approximately 12 nautical miles from the Estonian coast. Satellite imagery revealed a converted cargo vessel operating under a Liberian flag of convenience, equipped with communication arrays and satellite dishes that suggested sophisticated electronic capabilities. He's mobile, Jamie observed. Smart. Not smart enough. Maggie reached for the secure phone that connected directly to Commander Whitaker. We've found him. And now we're going to end this. But even as she dialed, Maggie knew that finding Caleb was only the beginning. The real battle was about to begin, and this time, there would be no retreat into anonymity when it was over. The converted cargo vessel Nereid rolled gently in the Baltic swells, her innocuous exterior concealing one of the most sophisticated cyber warfare platforms ever deployed. In the ship's redesigned cargo hold, Caleb Morgan sat surrounded by banks of computer equipment that hummed with the constant flow of encrypted data. At 38, he retained the lean build and sharp features that had once made him popular with NATO intelligence officers, but his eyes now carried the cold calculation of someone who had learned to trust no one and forgive nothing. They're good, he said to no one in particular, watching the intrusion attempts cascade across his defensive networks. Better than I expected. His fingers moved across multiple keyboards simultaneously, orchestrating countermeasures with the fluid grace of a conductor leading a digital symphony. The attacks against his infrastructure were sophisticated and precise, bearing the hallmarks of someone who understood not just his techniques, but his psychological profile. Hello, Specter, he said softly, recognizing patterns that could only come from one source. I wondered when you'd crawl out of whatever hole you've been hiding in. The secure communication channel opened without his permission, a feat that should have been impossible given the multiple layers of encryption and misdirection he employed. But the voice that emerged from his speakers was achingly familiar, carrying memories of operations conducted in dark rooms where the fate of nations hung on lines of code. Hello, Caleb. Margaret Chen's voice was steady, professional, but Caleb caught the underlying tension that came from confronting an old friend turned enemy. He leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It's been, 18 years since Cyprus? You look well, considering. I wouldn't know. We're not on video. Aren't we? Caleb's fingers danced across his keyboard, and suddenly Maggie's image appeared on his screens, a real-time feed from cameras he had infiltrated throughout the Norfolk Naval Station. Amazing what you can accomplish when you put your mind to it. 300 miles away, Maggie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in her secure workspace. Caleb's ability to penetrate their supposedly secure facility demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond what she had anticipated. Impressive, she said calmly, not allowing her voice to betray the alarm she felt. But reconnaissance was always your specialty. Among other things, I've been following your career with interest. Or should I say your lack of one? Fixing printers for 18 years must have been quite a come-down from saving the world. Some of us learn to value quiet service over personal glory. Quote, and some of us learned that loyalty is a luxury that governments can't afford. Caleb's voice sharpened with old bitterness. Tell me, Specter, do you ever think about the people who died because of decisions made in comfortable offices by men who never faced the consequences of their actions? Maggie glanced at Jamie, who was monitoring the conversation while simultaneously tracing the source of Caleb's transmission. The kid was good, better than good, but Caleb was a master at misdirection and operational security. I think about them every day, she said quietly. Rachel Torres was my best friend and partner. Her death haunts me more than you could imagine. Good, it should. Caleb's image appeared on her screens. Older, harder, but unmistakably the man who had once been her ally in operations that officially never happened. But Rachel died because our own governments decided she was expendable. The intelligence leak that compromised Operation Silent Storm came from someone with access to NATO command protocols. That was never proven. It was never investigated. Caleb's composure cracked slightly, revealing the rage that had been building for 20 years. They let her die, Specter. They sacrificed her and 5 others to protect some political arrangement that was more important than the lives of the people doing their dirty work. So you decided to become a terrorist? I decided to become what they taught me to be, a weapon. The only difference is, now I choose my own targets. While they spoke, the real battle was being fought in the digital realm. Maggie's team was systematically dismantling Caleb's infrastructure, cutting his connections to support networks, and isolating his mobile command center. But Caleb was fighting back with equal intensity, his countermeasures designed to cause maximum damage to American naval systems. You're wasting your talents, Maggie said, her hands never pausing in their assault on his defenses. Whatever grievances you have with our governments, taking them out on innocent sailors won't bring Rachel back. Innocent? Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Those sailors are part of a military machine that crushes smaller nations for the convenience of corporate interests. Their innocence died the moment they put on the uniform. That's not what we used to believe. That's what we told ourselves to sleep at night. But deep down, we always knew we were just very sophisticated killers working for people who viewed us as expendable assets. The philosophical debate continued, but Maggie could see that Jamie was making progress in tracing Caleb's location. The combination of signals intelligence and network analysis was gradually narrowing down the source of his transmissions. Got it, Jamie whispered. Vessel designation Nereid, international waters, 12 nautical miles northeast of Talon. Maggie nodded without breaking rhythm in her conversation with Caleb. You're right about one thing. Governments do treat people as expendable, but that doesn't justify what you're doing. Doesn't it? How many civilians died in the wars we helped enable? How many children lost parents because of intelligence we provided to support military operations? Caleb's voice carried the fervor of someone who had found righteousness in revenge. At least I'm honest about what I am. You're a traitor who's forgotten the difference between justice and vengeance. And you're a coward who spent 18 years hiding from the consequences of her own actions. The words hit Maggie like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain focused on the tactical situation. Caleb's psychological warfare was as sophisticated as his technical attacks. He knew exactly which emotional buttons to push to disrupt her concentration. Maybe I am a coward, she said quietly, but I'm still going to stop you. Are you? Because I have one more demonstration planned, something that will make yesterday's fleet exercise look like a minor technical glitch. Even as he spoke, Caleb's hands were moving across his keyboards with desperate intensity. He had recognized the scope of Maggie's assault on his systems and was implementing his final contingency plan, a scorched earth cyber attack that would take down as much American naval infrastructure as possible before his networks were completely compromised. Jamie, Maggie said urgently, he's launching something big. Can you see the target? Working on it. Jesus Christ, Maggie, he's targeting the entire East Coast Fleet Command Network. If this succeeds, every ship from Norfolk to Miami will be dead in the water. The next few minutes would determine whether 18 years of hiding had dulled Maggie's edge, or simply given her perspective on what was truly worth fighting for. As Caleb's final attack cascaded through cyberspace toward its targets, she drew upon every technique she had ever learned, every innovation she had ever developed, every instinct that had once made her the most feared cyber warrior in the world. The battle for control of America's naval forces would be decided by keystrokes in code, by two former allies who had become enemies, by the question of whether justice or vengeance would prevail in the digital shadows where the real wars of the 21st century were fought. And for the first time in 18 years, Specter was exactly where she belonged. "Let's finish this," she said, and began to type with the fury of someone who had found her purpose again. The silence in the secure workspace was broken only by the steady hum of cooling fans and the distant sound of activity from the base beyond their walls. Caleb's final attack had been neutralized with seconds to spare, his networks dismantled, and his ship intercepted by a joint task force of Navy and Estonian vessels. The immediate threat was over, but the larger questions remained unanswered. "Outstanding work," Commander Whitaker said, settling into a chair across from Maggie's workstation. "The preliminary assessment shows that you prevented what could have been the most devastating cyber attack in naval history." Maggie continued staring at her screens, where lines of code still scrolled past like digital memories of the battle just fought. It shouldn't have been necessary. If the intelligence community had properly investigated the leaks from Operation Silent Storm, Caleb might never have gone rogue. Maybe, but that's not your responsibility to carry. Isn't it? Maggie finally looked up, her eyes carrying the weight of 18 years of questions that had never been answered. 6 people died because of decisions I made. Caleb became a terrorist because of missions I helped plan. How much of this is really my fault? Jamie, who had been quietly monitoring post-operation network traffic, turned from his workstation. "Can I say something?" Both women looked at him, and for a moment the young petty officer seemed very aware of the difference in rank and experience between himself and the people he was addressing. "Go ahead," Maggie said. "I've been thinking about something you said, about people who work with you tending to die, but that's not really accurate, is it?" Jamie's voice gained confidence as he continued. "People who work in cyber warfare tend to face dangerous situations. People who fight terrorists and enemy agents tend to get hurt sometimes, but that's not because of you. That's because of the job. The job I chose for them. The job they chose for themselves. Rachel Torres wasn't some innocent civilian you dragged into a war zone. She was a trained military officer who volunteered for dangerous missions. The same as you, the same as Caleb, the same as everyone else who puts on a uniform." Maggie was quiet for a long moment, considering words that challenged assumptions she had carried for 18 years. "You think I've been wrong about my responsibility?" "I think you've been carrying guilt that belongs to the people who made the decisions above your pay grade," Jamie replied. "You were a weapon, Maggie, the best weapon the Navy had. But weapons don't choose targets, and they don't make policy. They just execute the missions they're given. And if the missions are wrong, then you work to change the people giving the missions, not hide from the fight entirely." Commander Whitaker leaned forward, studying Maggie with calculating eyes. "Which brings us to the matter at hand. Navy Cyber Command wants to offer you a permanent position, not as a recalled reserve officer, but as a civilian contractor with complete operational autonomy." "What does that mean?" "It means you'd work directly for SECNAV, with authority to organize and lead cyber warfare operations as you see fit, your own team, your own budget, your own mission parameters." Whitaker paused. "It means we'd stop trying to fit you into existing organizational structures, and let you create your own." The offer was tempting in ways Maggie hadn't expected. For 18 years she had told herself that she was done with the world of shadows and secrets, that fixing computers and living quietly was enough. But the past few days had reminded her of something she had tried to forget. This was what she was good at. This was where she belonged. This was how she could make a real difference. "What about my people here? The IT department staff who depend on me?" "They'd be taken care of. And if any of them want to join your new organization," Whitaker glanced meaningfully at Jamie, "well, talent should be allowed to reach its full potential." "I'm in," Jamie said immediately. "Whatever this new job involves, wherever it leads, I'm in." "You don't even know what you'd be signing up for." Quote, I know I'd be working with the best cyber warfare specialist in the world, doing work that actually matters, protecting people who can't protect themselves. Jamie's expression was determined. That's enough for me. Maggie stood and walked to the window that looked out over the Norfolk Naval Station. Sailors moved through the base's daily routine, most of them unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Ships prepared for deployment, aircraft conducted training flights, and the vast machinery of naval operations continued its eternal cycle. If I take this position, she said slowly, there's no guarantee it will end well. The enemies we face are getting more sophisticated, more dangerous. Some of them might be people I used to know, used to trust. There are no guarantees in this business, Whitaker replied, but there are necessities. And right now, we need someone who can wage war in cyberspace with the same intensity that our enemies bring to the fight. What about my quiet life? My anonymity? Gone. After what happened with Admiral Reeves and the stories from the Walmart encounter, too many people know who you really are. Whitaker's expression softened slightly. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's time for Specter to come out of the shadows and remind the world that some people still fight for what's right. That evening, Maggie found herself at Harbor Electronics, helping Emily repair a laptop while they talked about everything except the decision she had to make. The shop was quiet, filled with the comfortable clutter of projects in various stages of completion, and for a moment she could almost pretend that her life was still simple. "You're going back, aren't you?" Emily said without looking up from the circuit board she was examining. "How can you tell?" "Because you look like yourself again. For the first time in years, you look like someone who knows exactly what she's supposed to be doing." Maggie set down her screwdriver and studied her friend's face. "Are you okay with that?" "I'm terrified for you, but I'm also proud of you." Emily smiled. "You've been hiding from yourself as much as from your past. Maybe it's time to stop. And if something happens to me, then something happens. But at least it happens while you're doing what you were born to do, instead of while you're pretending to be someone else." The next morning, Maggie met Admiral Reeves for coffee at a small cafe near the base. The man who had inadvertently shattered her anonymity looked older in civilian clothes, but his bearing still commanded respect from everyone in the restaurant. "I owe you an apology," he said as they settled at a corner table. "I never intended to expose your identity. Old habits. You know, when I see someone who saved my career and possibly my life, I react accordingly." "It's all right, Admiral. It needed to happen eventually." "So you're taking the position?" "Yes, with conditions. I work my way with my people using my methods. No political interference, no bureaucratic oversight, no second-guessing from people who've never waged war in cyberspace." "Agreed. Though I suspect you'll find that the current administration is more willing to let competent people do their jobs than previous ones." Reeves smiled. "The president was briefed on your role in stopping Morgan's attack. He's impressed." "Good. Because if we're going to do this right, we'll need support from the very top." "You'll have it. The question is, what do you need from us?" Maggie considered the question, thinking about the enemies she would face, the battles she would fight, the people she would be responsible for protecting. Time to build a team that can handle anything our enemies throw at us, resources to develop new capabilities faster than they can counter them, and the authority to act when action is necessary without waiting for committee approval. Done. Anything else? A promise that when this war is over, and it is a war, Admiral, make no mistake about that, the people who fight it won't be abandoned or betrayed. The soldiers who wage these battles deserve better than to be forgotten when their usefulness ends. Reeves nodded slowly. "You have my word. And for what it's worth, you also have the gratitude of everyone who serves in the fleet. They may never know your name, but they owe their lives to what you've done." 3 weeks later, Maggie stood in a new facility that existed on no official Navy blueprints, surrounded by computer equipment that represented the cutting edge of cyber warfare technology. Her team was small, but growing. Jamie as her deputy and technical specialist, a handful of carefully selected personnel from various military and civilian agencies, and the promise of additional resources as their mission evolved. The nameplate on her desk read, Director, Naval Cyber Warfare Division Special Operations, but the title mattered less than the work itself. For the first time in 18 years, she was exactly where she belonged. "First mission briefing in 10 minutes, Jamie announced, entering her office with a folder marked with classification stamps. "Intelligence has identified a new threat, Chinese military hackers targeting our Pacific Fleet communications. Maggie smiled, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the prospect of battle. Then I guess Specter is officially back in business. Question is, Jamie said with a grin, are our enemies ready for her? Probably not, but they're about to find out. As her team assembled for their first official mission, Maggie reflected on the journey that had brought her from hiding in plain sight to leading the Navy's most classified cyber warfare unit. The quiet years had taught her patience and perspective, but they had also shown her that some people couldn't escape their true calling. They could only choose whether to embrace it or be consumed by it. She had made her choice. The mission would always choose her, but now she was choosing it back. And in the invisible war, being fought in cyberspace, that made all the difference. The story of Margaret Maggie Chen, the woman who became Specter, was far from over. It was just beginning again. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.